Today's discussion, we have a little bit of a rant about goals. If you've listened to any podcasts in the past or hear my ranting about goals in general, you know that at least on a public-facing sort of persona side, I overtly say I hate goals, mostly because people in general suck at goals, and that has nothing to do with them and everything to do with what people think goal means and what to do with it. And so I will sort of make it look like I renege a little bit and talk about goals in a way to actually make your life better, instead of just making you feel excited for about 3 seconds and then making you feel guilty for failing, which tends to amount to what goals mostly amount to. Today's discussion will cover, well, I think we can get to it, how short-term goals and long-term goals contribute to changing, why effective short-term goals have the long-term advantage, features of effective short-term goals, I want to start this out. Does anybody know Jon Kabat-Zinn? Hopefully I pronounced his name right. So Jon Kabat-Zinn brought mindfulness and made it popular here in the United States. Actually, a guy that specialized in, I think, molecular biology. He has a doctoral degree in molecular biology and then got into the clinical study of stress and then incorporating what he called mindfulness. Will I get into that? No, I can sum it up in one quote that I wrote down of his. Jon Kabat-Zinn said, "Wherever you go, there you are." Yeah, really good for angry white people. Now, Jon Kabat-Zinn said, "Wherever you go, there you are." But Yogi Berra said, "If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else." And another cranky old white guy told me that the Japanese have a saying, "Many raindrops make an ocean." And I think if we combine all these platitudes, we can come up with something useful. Hopefully we can do that. So I believe now the general dictionary definition of a goal defines it as something like the object of one's effort, something like that. Something about the whatever you have at the end of an ambition, something about effort and ambition and objects. You combine those three things and people consider that a goal. The dictionary says so. Therefore, laws of physics. I suggest something different, frankly. I propose that goals, good ones anyway, as something setting the stage for a beneficial outcome. I define goals that way. Goals, setting the stage for a beneficial outcome. This now breaks down into two components of setting the stage for beneficial outcomes now, or a short-term goal, something that takes you from 0 to 1, and connecting beneficial outcomes together in a rational and progressing way, or long-term goal, which takes you from 1 to 10. So goals, or setting the stage for a beneficial outcome, have three important benefits. One, they raise motivation. They raise motivation because they make it obvious the benefits of a given outcome. There you go. Pretty simple. Two, they help you tolerate frustration because the work you do now helps you later, and having this goal and the motivation connected to each other helps you keep that on the forefront. And third, if done the right way, provides a regular source of positive reinforcement, which means stable emotions. Misery goes down and joy goes up. So goals have these three main benefits in my opinion. So setting the stage for a beneficial outcome raises the motivation, raises your frustration tolerance, and gives you a source of positive reinforcement, which stabilizes your emotions, giving you wins and a direction to go. And to define positive reinforcement, it means the outcome of a behavior that raises the probability you'll do it again. If you ate a pizza and you liked it, you'll probably eat that pizza again in the future. Positive reinforcement. Now, effective goals, or ways to set the stage for a beneficial outcome, have three layers. What you do now, how it sets you up for later, and what it means for you as a person. Wherever you go, there you are. Hopefully you want to be there when you get there with all of your raindrops. See, we've already done it. So let's talk about how short-term goals and long-term goals contribute to change, or rather short-term goals and a long-term goal. We can do this with a set of directions. So I'll just have you copy these directions down and you can do it later, taking advantage of this, writing down the long-term goal, however you define it, and then working backwards, creating a chain of events, the most important part that lead up to this final product. So each link in that chain sets the stage for the next link in the chain. And really, the more steps you make, the better. People tend to think like, oh my goodness, it has 10 million steps, it'll take forever. And I consider that a huge fallacy, because you can have 2 steps that take 20 years to complete and 2,000 steps that can take a day. So really, the number of steps gives us a huge advantage because it adds resolution. It gives us more direction, more chances to win, your regular source of positive reinforcement, and it adds momentum, which really, using this Premax law, behavior scientists discovered this a long time ago. If you order your operations in a specific way, and you put the most reinforcing one at the end and the crappier ones at the beginning, like starting out anything in general, you will pull yourself to the end. In short, on Instagram, I call it Grandma's Law, where you start with vegetables and you end with dessert. And as you go through your day, your activities get more desserty as you go. So essentially, each link in this chain of events has a rational progression up to the goal, and working backwards gives you some assurance that you put them in the correct order. So most people understand that you want to break a goal into parts, but really they just create a list of stuff that may eventually get them there if they stick to it 100% in perfect conditions.
Have a plan, stick to it.
Where they start with a list of beneficial outcomes rather than start with a list of beneficial outcomes that stair step to the final goal, that also tell you what to do and when. So referring back to Perry from our last discussion, where the doctor told him he had to lose 60 pounds or else, and he gave him the middle finger and stormed out, he knew he had a final goal of losing 60 pounds. Does it really tell you to do anything though? Absolutely not. And he also knew that he had this large goal of 60 pounds, and at the time he had exactly 0% chance of attaining that goal. So to put it lightly, he avoided it. Like most of us do. We have this big, long, huge project and we get overwhelmed by it. And with that overwhelm, we start avoiding. He did the same thing. We do the same stuff all the time. So granted, people will shorten and simplify the list of things it takes using vague terms. For instance, Perry knows, we all know, well, if you want to lose 60 pounds, eat less and move more. Duh, eat less and move more. And although true, this vagary does some interesting stuff. One, again, it overwhelms people because the oversimplification in direction, for instance, again, eat less and move more, leads to an overcomplication in execution. How many different ways can you eat less and move more? What does eat less even mean? What does move more even mean? That level of vagary to make things silly, which, in situations like this only seems silly, maybe it means I move apartments. I moved 4 times and I'm still fat, right? Which sounds ridiculous, but when you look at the language, he follows directions, okay? And because of the connotations of these different words, moving means all of these different things, which means it takes a lot of translating on the back end to turn it into something useful. So all of that latent translating, in my opinion, actually contributes to the overwhelm. How many different ways can you move? Move can mean dancing. It can mean going to a different state. It could mean your move on the chessboard, right? All of these things now, we know how to discriminate when we see them laid out, although I do think in the back end here, it adds a little bit of processing power, it takes a little bit of processing power to do it. So it overwhelms people because oversimplification leads to overcomplicating the execution. And 2, it sends people spinning off in a million different directions until they quit out of frustration. If you exercise more, for instance, you'll also lounge harder in your off time. If you have interest in that, check out the laws of constrained, or the principles of constrained energy expenditure. Pretty cool. A person can expend 2,000 calories in a day doing their normal stuff, or they can expend 1,000 calories in a hardcore training session and then lounge around the rest of the day, so they still burn 2,000 calories over the course of the day. Okay, you've all had a tough workout where you just wanted to lay down and do nothing after. Well, that laying down and doing nothing burns a heck of a lot less calories than continuing to move around. So although your fitness goes up, your calorie expenditure stays the same. The extra lounging also promotes snacking. So you might net the same amount of activity, and adding snacks actually causes weight gain. So a lot of people think that, well, I exercised a bunch and I actually got fatter. And you know what? They get it right. You can also eat twice as much food and lose weight. You can eat half as much food and lose weight. What does how much food mean? If you account for food by mass or volume rather than the calories, you can do the right thing and still get the wrong result. And that happens all the time too. All of this happened to Perry and his eternal frustration for decades. So he started with the short-term goal of tracking his food. Tracking his food as a goal set the stage for the beneficial outcome of knowing what he put in his body. It also had many pleasant side effects, okay, of revealing simple and easy things he could do to change, right? Have regular foods. So we went from tracking his food, then going to regular foods, and then in regular patterns and in regular amounts. See all of these things creating a successive approximation, these rational progression and steps towards something that will lead to his 60-pound loss. All of them different short-term goals, one setting the stage for the other. And this leads us to why effective short-term goals have the long-term advantage. Effective short-term goals have the advantage over the long-term because they direct your behavior right now. I would say a vast majority of long-term goals amount to some status, to be skinny or be happy or have more energy, have a good relationship, whatever the case. It really represents some status rather than some action. And that makes it difficult of what the heck do I do? So So running a marathon in 6 months or losing 60 pounds, it does, strictly speaking, set the stage for a beneficial outcome. So I do consider it a goal. But what does it set the stage for right now? Arousal at the prospect of losing 60 pounds, getting excited that I'm running a marathon in 6 months. And then it stops. I've experienced this a lot. I'll throw myself under the bus. Whenever I watch an MMA fight, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do all that fighty stuff. I like it. It looks so fun and flop around, right? And then like the fight ends and I get excited for a minute and then I forget. I go, I'd love to do that. And then I leave Buffalo Wild Wings and a few hours later I go, what do I do now? Until, I see another fight and then it all starts all over again. I think most of us probably have those sorts of things that happen. Really exciting. I love jujitsu. I really think people just like to say it. In other case, you get really excited when you see this happening and you want to do it. And then what happens? Nothing. Okay. A really long-term goal to say, I want to get into the octagon. Okay. Good luck. 10 years later, I'm too old to do it anyway. So Perry's short-term goal to track his eating lent itself to straightforward instructions, which, working with us, working with everyone here, we could apply best practices to save him some time and keep him from struggling and get results faster. So he knew okay, tracking my food makes a lot of sense. And then it also begs the question, what do I do to track my food? And so even if you get higher resolution, it still ends up getting gnarlier. So what do I do? How do I do it? And when? And when you do it all by yourself or know very little about the thing you want to do, that overwhelms you too. So thankfully he could work with all of us to do it. He did know though that he could track his food. Then it just came down to how. And he consulted somebody who had done it before and they gave him their best practices. But really, losing 60 pounds and running a marathon gave him some status to attain versus telling him what to do. And he could only attain those statuses in the best case scenario after many months. So what do I do literally right now? Instead of giving him something effective to do that would get him there as a side effect of doing it. So if you have a short-term goal that you know you can reach, Perry knew he could track his food. He knew he could at least do that. Your efficacy goes up. The belief that you can do the thing goes up. And when you believe you can do the thing, you will work harder at doing it and you will persist longer in the presence of frustration. So when you go for that goal that you think you can do or that you know you can do, you have a higher chance of reaching it. Amazing. Sounds obvious. Who puts it into practice? Approximately nobody. So I will keep pounding it in. Then with the rational progression, the chain of short-term goals reveals the next thing you can do with similar relative effort. Now, the whole idea of a bunch of steps throws people off because people equate a ton of steps with a ton of time and energy. In reality, eat less and move more equals 2 steps. I could write out 50 steps you could do in less than 30 minutes and put you way further along than eat less and move more, which would take years in principle in some situations depending on the status. So the equation of a bunch of steps and more work actually works against people. In reality, the more steps you have, the less work it takes because you know what to do and when, and you can tell if you've done it correctly. And if you can tell you've done it correctly, you want to do the next step. People put puzzles together. Puzzle might have 1,000 pieces, 1,000 steps. And guess what? Every piece of the puzzle you add, it makes, strictly speaking, the next puzzle piece to put in easier. So it actually speeds up as you go. And it turns out learning skills, just like I consider putting puzzles together a skill, goes the same way. The first couple of pieces really suck. And then after that, you narrow your options and it starts to get more obvious as you go. Putting together a rational chain of short-term goals that lead up to the long-term status creates this for you, actually does it. So I think Perry, he had at least 24 short-term goals, all of which he built the skills and discipline which compounded into his final product. I know a bunch of them off the top of my head because I worked with him before we had this fancy TKN stuff and it turned into a lot of what we do now, except I pounded it into him in a violent way personally before. So I could probably rattle these off. Something like record your food, record your body weight, record your exercise, record your sleep, write down questions I have during the week, check in every Tuesday and ask those questions, go to the calls and videos each week and watch the videos each week. Now, if you can do that, well, then it makes sense too. Well, if I recorded my food, well, then I can have a regular meal pattern. I could have a regular walking schedule once I know how much I exercise. I can have a regular wake up time if I know how much I sleep. Ran out of fingers. I could have regular food choices once I have a regular food schedule. I can find a physical activity I like on top of walking once I start walking regularly. I can prepare food in bulk in the way I like it. If I have a regular wake up time, then I can have a regular bedtime. If I I can make food that I like and eat that food on a regular basis and know how much I eat, well, then that means I can eat regular amounts of food each time. He can start experimenting with different physical activities to see which one he likes, to add some variety, or find out something he wants to stick to so he can get good at it. He could combine screen time with physical activity. Once he has a walking schedule down and he stares at his phone sometimes, he could walk and stare at his phone at the same time at least. I know I can do this. I know I can stare at the phone. I know I can walk. Now I can try combining the two. Again, sounds ridiculous. Good. How many people do it? Very few. Do I have any more rhetorical questions to give? Absolutely. And then that leads into the more advanced things that he did, like managing food pushers, managing eating while bored and stressed, getting a training partner, or developing a procedure to get back on track when he goofs up. So you think, like, I've done this so many times, a lot of these, like, you can see kind of how they build on each other, all of them reasonable things to do. Each of these short-term goals also have multiple ways of getting them done. Any one of these on their own looks reasonable. And when done in a rational progression, they go from reasonable to doable. To kind of poke fun at another ism, this reminds me of, like, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. So what? So what? How does that help anybody? You can walk 1,000 miles weaving back and forth and end up further than you started. And I think a lot of people do that. They get really excited. Some of them even start, they put in a ton of work and get nowhere or worse. So they walked 1,000 miles and ended up further back than where they started. Let's say somebody wants to write a book and they have that as their motivator. I would say their chances of writing a book and getting it out there approach approximately 0. I want to write a book. Yeah, me too. Even if everyone keeps bugging me to do it. You have approximately 0 chance of getting it done and putting it out there. Reverse engineering the progression ends with what to do right now. Reverse engineering the progression of writing a book and getting it out. When you do a rational progression, okay, you reverse engineer it. Where does it end? It ends with you writing the rational progression. Pretty cool. You know, you can do drafts and stuff, but in principle, it ends where you start right now. Getting all A's, reverse engineered, looks like do tonight's assignment. Getting all A's as the point of focus would deject anybody struggling in school. So attention parents who say, if you get all A's, I'll give you this thing. When the kid has less than all A's and a B. If the kid has all A's and a B, well, then it makes sense to reward all A's. That means effectively a 5% improvement in total academic performance. Reasonable. So doing tonight's assignment, although tough for anyone struggling at school, even tough for people who do well in school, frankly, gets you a heck of a lot closer than avoiding school altogether because of the absurdity of getting all A's with a C average. Writing a book may start with 1 page of a short story, totally different from the book. The more you learn about the subject, the more interesting your rational progression gets, having written a few with different people's names on them. Maybe it starts with 400 words of an article covering some topic you enjoy. Neither of these things write the book, but the completion of this writing project does progress to completing another writing project, and book writing efficacy grows. Your belief that you can actually write a book gets greater and greater. And with some completed and successful projects like that under your belt, then maybe starting on an outline of a book makes sense. At which point, the outlined structure of a book, with its chapters and sections within those chapters, looks conspicuously like small writing projects you've already completed. Pretty cool. So the further off the goal, the grander it looks and the fuzzier the execution to get there. Therefore, set a rational progression of short goals, working backwards. If you work backwards, that makes it more of a rational progression than you work forwards. So this leads to one of my more interesting pet peeves of, okay, how do I make good on this? How do you set a short goal? The effective features of short goals. Coaches tell athletes and clients, or managers tell employees. I guess people call them team members now because nobody knows that you're an employee if you're actually part of a team. Parents, tell their children, do your best. It drives me up the wall. People either 1, really think it motivates, or 2, just say it because they think that they have to say it. And to that, I pose another question. Who does more damage? Who does more damage? The ignorant oaf or the criminal mastermind? Who causes more damage? To save the rant, the data show 1, specificity by and large beats vagary. 2, progressive beats arbitrary. Remember the rational progression. And 3, flexible beats rigid. Features of effective short goals. Specificity, by and large, beats vagary. Progressive beats arbitrary, and flexible beats rigid. The flexibility rigidity thing we'll go into a little bit because that also can create some issues. Going back to this do your best crap. Nobody can know if you do your best, even you. Nobody can know. Nor can you know if somebody else does their best. Nor can they know if they do their best. How do you know? Nobody knows. So aside from insulting the person by calling them a sandbagger by implication, do your best, as if I didn't do it before, it also gives the person nothing to do and nowhere to go. So do your best tends to mean do what you already do, but do it harder. Again, whatever that means. In another way, if what they did worked, then they would have made progress. And if they made progress, they'd have gotten a high five. Keep doing that thing. So really do your best. It just instructs people to work harder at something with a track record of failing. You know that stuff you've been doing that kept failing? Do that, except do it stronger, harder, and faster. More failing faster at higher intensities. The best way to go. Does this set the stage for a beneficial outcome? I think it does the opposite. I think it sets the stage for depression or conspicuous long-term deprivation of positive reinforcement. If you win at things, if you get beneficial outcomes often with things meaningful to you, which actually creates a circular argument because you would only have a positive outcome if it meant something to you. So by having beneficial outcomes more often, you have more joy in your life. Imagine that. Now you see another benefit of the rational progression of short goals. So bump your words by 5% next month, or combine 3 hours of screen time with walking over the next week. These values give clear direction to clear actions. And you probably noticed what I did with the time span of over a week or over a month, etc. This gives a little bit of flexibility to the flexibility where your preferences end up mattering and your history matters. So for the pro tip, you want to have the goal specific in its action orientation and flexible in its time and place. Combine 25 minutes of screen time with walking over the course of the day works better than walk 25 minutes at 5 a.m. Both add up to the 3 hours of walking over the course of the week. One crams you into the corner that only serves to add stress and raises the chance of failure, which, well, I woke up at 5:30 or 6 instead of 5, so now I do 0 walking ever. You set yourself up to fail, when in reality, if I just get the 30 minutes in or 25 minutes in today, I win. Now, so long as, in principle, so long as you get the 3 hours in, even if you spend 3 hours on Sunday, great. Approximate a more regular schedule when you have a history of doing that. So in some respects, it makes sense to break it up into little bits every day. That assumes you can do little bits every day. What if you have a variable schedule over the week? What if you do jack diddly on Sundays? Now, does it make sense to take your 18-hour workday and add 30 minutes of crap to do on that day? Or if you do jack diddly on Sundays, you can spend that day roaming around the park watching TikTok. So rational progression matters. And then as you get a history of doing that, you can start spreading it out and make something that gets you a little more daily activity. I would still consider every Sunday regular activity and a regular schedule. So in a similar situation with the words, at 500 a day, I think a 5% bump means 25 words a day, or a slightly longer writing session, 1 time per month. Yeah, 1 time per month when you have more time to spare. So you can write 25 words extra per day, or essentially get 1 extra writing session per month. Either way you win. Either way you win. That means you can get it out of the way early. You can still have room to catch up if stuff gets wacky. You still have a deadline that motivates you to do something. And as you progress, if you set yourself up to win, some of the literature says something like, if you make it too trivial, nobody will care. And like, no, wrong. Absolutely wrong. If you win, it feels good. You could beat a toddler at tic-tac-toe and go, I beat that little crapper. You know you'll win and it still feels good to win. You know it does. Okay, now, even if you know you'll win, yeah, dunking on a 6-year-old, yeah, it feels great, but nobody talks about it, okay? So I say this, that for whatever reason, this sort of like, maybe like the perfectionistic Protestant work ethic of like, you have to keep challenging yourself and seek discomfort and all this other stuff, it has its place and it really confuses people. People think of that as like, I'll set a goal I'll never freaking reach to make sure I'm a failure every time. Set yourself up to win. I know I can do this. That also means employing rational progression. If I can do this, then I can do that. It means you raise the floor every time you accomplish something, rather than I only beat the crap out of 6-year-olds in tic-tac-toe. Next week, I'll beat a 7-year-old. And then before you know it, you'll beat 110-year-olds. Rational progression. And I mean that in a serious way. It only gets trivial if you keep that as the standard. If you know that you can do this, well, then it means I can probably do that. And that goes back to the 10 million steps. You could do 10 million steps in an hour, or have 2 steps and fail at it your whole life in principle. And I see that principle following through all the time. People die having missed out on the only two. You only had to do 2 steps. Like, you only have one job. Oh man, kick that person in the gonads. That one job has 38 million different steps. And if one of those things gets screwy, then the one formal responsibility you have, which entails many thousands of behaviors, gets thrown off. Okay, so this, the rational progression, once you hit a goal, well, then you approximate to the ideal. You raise the standard a little bit. Specific short goals position you to get creative. So with this flexibility stuff, like over the week or over the month or whatever, again, you know yourself better than anyone else. Actually, I take that back. If you live with somebody, they probably know you better than you do. I know that sounds insulting, but really, they look at you from the outside and they could probably predict what you would do in any given situation better than you could, because you have to do what do I want to do versus what I would actually do. And then you have this like weird algebraic summation that adds up to nothing useful. When like, if you spend every day with someone, be like, yeah, she would hate that and do this. Listen to that person. When I say they know more about you than you do, I mean, they probably have a higher degree of accuracy in predicting what you would do in a given situation, because they only have evidence of what you've done, where you have some weird, you confabulate. Okay, I'll put out the C word. If you don't know what that means, ask your parents. Basically, you make a bunch of stuff up that sounds good and makes sense even, which makes it worse. Okay, so a lot of people probably know you better than you in the context that they could probably guess what you would do in a given situation to a higher degree of accuracy than you could, and that might help you with your rational progression. So the flexibility of, I have 30 minutes a day to do this thing, or I have 210 minutes over the course of a week, and I can do it all in one day if I wanted, or I can do it split around if I wanted. It positions you to get creative. Like, could I do this every day? No, I could do it once a week. Efficacy. I can do it once a week. If you say, I can do this, it feels good. Okay, now you have a greater chance of doing it once per week if it feels good to say, I can do this once a week. Then if you can do it once a week, then you can say, I can do this twice a week. Okay. And soon enough, it goes to every day or not. Okay. It all depends on the context of the final goal. Does it have to happen every day? Well, then why must you do it every day? Or else you're a failure and give up. You have one job, lose 60 pounds. So the specific short goals position you to get creative, build your efficacy and discipline as a side effect. That creativity of, look how many different ways I can do this. With this many different ways I can do this, a couple of these actually look realistic for me. So how many ways can I do this with the resources I have? And what resources can I get to give me more options? Thank you so much for learning. Stay rational. Until next time, Dr. Kashey out.